And I got interested in international law because I was studying international relations. I went to law school, frankly, on a lark, and I didn't want to stop studying international relations. If I hadn't gone to law school, I would have gotten a master's degree in international studies. I have a graduate degree in international studies. And so I went to law school, and I naturally gravitated toward studying, in particular, European Union law. I had studied European Union Latin American relations in school, and I continued that interest. And then I pursued opportunities with private law firms. In the UK, I worked for Allen & Overy. In New York, I worked for a firm called Cleary Gottlieb Steen and Hamilton. And I said from the start, I want to have a non-US centric practice, and so I wound up doing basically all cross-border transactions. M&A, mergers and acquisitions, corporate finance, banking, capital markets, ran the gamut. If I hadn't gone into academia, I would probably be a competition lawyer, a UK competition lawyer right now. I was asked to actually come to my firm's office in London and do some competition work, and the opportunity arose to go into academia, and I took that one instead. You know, I have found that the lawyering is actually a pretty consistent culture in some ways. The idea of law and how I see law as a structuring mechanism for politics, for the relationships among people, is pretty consistent across. And so you wind up seeing a lot of the same personalities and motivators in you know, common law countries like the UK or the United States, in civil law countries that I've worked in, the Dominican Republic, Italy, Chile, just it runs the gamut. And so I see a lot of that is the same. What I think is really interesting, and what has been an interesting range of things, is how people respond to me as a lawyer. And I had the really great fortune of working in New York City. And in New York City, you probably are going to find the most diverse community of lawyers in the world. And so, you know, that was a place where when I walked into my office and when I walked into my building, probably 75% of the time, people expected me to be in this space. And people expected me or didn't question that I was in the space. But I will tell you, I've had clients spend hundreds, if not thousands of dollars with me on the phone in order to get me to talk to all of their friends. I represented a sovereign government once, and they just thought it was amazing that they had this black woman lawyer. And so they just had everybody in the Ministry of Finance come chat with me on the phone because I'm fluent in Spanish. And so we had that conversation, and I said, you know, this is going to look, we bill by the hour and we have to record what we were doing. I said, this is going to be the most interesting diary for billing purposes I've ever had to fill out, because it was, you know, shock the Ministry of Finance that a black woman speaks Spanish and can be their lawyer, which was particularly interesting because this is a majority black country. And so it really brought home how profoundly segregated the legal profession is. And so that's what I see as being different, the reaction to who can be in this space. And here in the UK, in the firm that I worked in, when I worked there in my department, there was me, who was a junior trainee. That was not my role because I'm a U.S. lawyer, but the equivalent of a trainee, and one junior associate who was a black woman. And, you know, we're in the city of London, and that says something about the culture of who gets to structure. You know, these are the biggest law firms in the world, working for the biggest countries, working for the biggest companies in the world. Who is structuring? Who is guiding these companies? It doesn't look like everybody. And I think that's the biggest sort of range of things that I've seen. I have been really fortunate. I had an amazing career in practice. You know, it's weird to say, during the financial crisis that began in, you know, 2007, 2008, depending on how you frame it, was precipitated here, or was precipitated in the United States, but moved into a global financial crisis. I was at the table. And when I say at the table, I mean literally, I was sitting at the negotiation table when some of the things that you hear in movies that are now in documentaries that are written about in books were happening. And that's really amazing. In the 90s, basically every country in Latin America was having a crisis, private business crisis, that had to do with privatization and a lot of other things, but that meant we were restructuring both government and private debt, and I was there and I was involved in that. And so as a person who did private, you know, financial-based law, I got to be in a lot of exciting places. And so, you know, the hard stuff was, you know, not sleeping for a week, literally. But also, as I sort of I don't want to say look back on my career because I still think I'm at the beginning, but as I look and I reflect, I ask myself, how many times did I get to bring my whole self to the table? How many times did I even think that my whole self was relevant? And how much? So I was in the room when a very big and important financial institution in the United States failed. And it was funny because I got called to the meeting on an emergency basis. And the only suit that I had sitting in my office, because we are business casual and we don't always wear suits, was a white seersucker suit with pinstripes. So I was a black lady wearing a white suit, which is not what you would really wear to a professional meeting. On thought, I don't know why I own a white suit, but it was very cute. And so that's why I had it. And the partner who called me, I said, I'm going to need just a second because I need to go down to Brooks Brothers, which was in on the ground floor of our office building, and they sell suits at Brooks Brothers. I'm going to need to go to Brooks Brothers, not even like someplace cool like Selfridges. I need to go to Brooks Brothers and buy the nerdiest suit that I can find. And he said, there's no time. I have a taxi basically waiting for you. Get in that car right now. So I put on this suit and I drive uptown. I'm in New York City, so I drive uptown to this office building. And I walk into the room and there's probably 50 people around this huge conference table. And everyone is very serious. And everyone is white. And of course, everyone is wearing a dark suit. Grays and blues. And so I walk in, this black woman in a white suit. There are a couple of other women there, in this sort of, it's 2008, so it's sort of surreal because they are running in and they're bringing copies and they're bringing coffees and drinks, but it's clear that they are lawyers. And so I felt really good because I was like, oh, very happy that I work for my firm and that this partner who I'm working with would never dream of asking me to get copies or coffee. But we proceed and we stay in this room for a really long time, and we're on the phone with high-ranking officials in the U.S. government who eventually tell us this bank is failing today. But this was a conversation that went on, and I sat there and I looked around and I said, there's no women who are deciding this decision that, we knew, right, what was going to happen next. We knew that this was going to have ripples across the globe. No women were making any decisions in this moment. No people of color were making any decisions in this moment. And so when I reflect on the fact that I wasn't able to bring my full self to the table, that I didn't think it was relevant, it makes me really think about what law is. And, some of my work right now, I say, Property is a white man because property was built for white men and in their image. International law is a white man because those are the people who build these systems. And I just wonder, what would be different? And would it have been easier? And would things have made more sense when they were hard if my ways of knowing and my ways of being had ever been relevant in the practice that I have done and sort of the practical law that I even continue to teach? My late grandmother thought I was amazing, as grandmothers are wont to do. And the kind of work that I did, there's lots of times it's sad stuff going on. And so one of the biggest transactions that I worked on, I was a part of the team that represented the United Auto Workers, which is one of the largest unions in the United States. And it is we represented the union workers in the bankruptcies and restructuring of all of the major auto companies in the United States. And so I worked on that team, and it was this crazy deal. And we actually, like, our deal finished because then U.S. President Barack Obama called someone. I didn't get to be on that phone call, but called someone and said, I'm going and I'm having a press conference. You could literally Google and find the press conference that I'm talking about. He said, I'm going on and having a press conference at this time. This deal has to be done. And we were literally still negotiating and drafting documents. And it happened, and of course we make it happen because when the president says the deal has to be done, the deal gets done, at least if you're U.S. lawyers, right? But afterwards, it wound up being an amazing experience, but I always look fondly back on it because my grandmother was like, okay, so now you're going to be nominated for the Supreme Court of the United States. And I was like, yeah, no. And she said, but you worked for Barack Obama, and once he knows you, obviously, you're gonna, be nominated for the Supreme Court. And I'm in my early 20s, and I said, first of all, grandmother, I don't know the President of the United States. Second, even if I had met him on this deal, I don't think he's nominating me for the Supreme Court of the United States. And she says, well, then he doesn't know what he's doing. And it made this crazy experience that I had that was really rewarding professionally that much more special because I thought, wow, what the work that I was doing, people in the world understood. And most of my work, right, I worked for Teléfonos de México, which is one of the biggest telecommunications companies owned by a man who's frequently the richest man in the world. And my first deal ever was helping that company raise $2 billion. And in the same week that I was helping that company raise $2 billion, my family is from California, and they're all teachers, and the state of California needed $2 million to save some, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of teachers' jobs. And I was, raising $2 million over the weekend. And so a lot of the time, the nature of my work kept me very far removed from people in my life. And so that was just a moment where I said, no, the work that I do affects, real people. I also did a lot of pro bono asylum representation. And so that wound up being a really important part of my work. Because I'm not a doctor, I'm a Juris Doctor, but I'm not a doctor. And when you work for companies that are raising $2 billion or restructuring debt, and you're not in the midst of a financial crisis, sometimes you struggle to really appreciate the day-to-day impact of the work you do. And so it was always very, very rewarding to literally save someone's life, which is what you do when you do asylum work. And it also, one of the few, sometimes I got to write laws, and so that was fun. But in asylum law, rather than just making up a law that you write and then some government passes, which I have done, you actually get to deal with actual real international treaties, and then you read them, and then you figure out how a particular, in this case the United States, has implemented them into a real legal regime that you can then theoretically go before an adjudicator and say, this has to happen. And if you're not a litigator, if you don't go to court all the time, you don't get that opportunity very frequently. Most of the time you have to spend saying, I'll give you this, you give me that, and then I write that down into a contract. And so asylum representations were sort of getting you to feel like a TV lawyer sometimes. the honest advice that I can give is to think broadly about what international law is and means and why you want to do it. The legal profession, wherever you are, is sort of almost infinitely diverse. And, you know, I said that I wanted to be an international lawyer because I studied international relations. I spoke a lot of languages and I didn't want to leave that behind. But there are lots of people who would have been wholly dissatisfied with my very much private international law practice because they think of international law as public international law. And I was able to be really, and that's what I had studied. I had studied public international law before going to law school. And even during law school, right, when I'm studying European Union law, that's a supranational public regime that has real impacts in private law systems, but it is quote-unquote public law. And I have a scholarly problem with the difference between public and private law, but you know what I mean. If I had not been willing to see broadly the international implications of the work that I was doing, I wouldn't have been able to have as rewarding a career. The other thing that I think that people should do is be willing to explore. You know, I would have never, I thought when I was in my last year of law school that I would go to my law firm that I wound up being associated with for 10 years, and that I would work in New York for a couple of years, and that I would move to our office in Milan, and I would be this fun, loving Italian lady lawyer. And that's not what happened, because a lot of other things presented themselves for me. And so sometimes we have plans, but also taking those opportunities. And as I think for women, taking opportunities is much more risky. The world is not built to be our safety net. And so, even though I took, I didn't sow my wild oats until I had a law degree, at which point I went to Latin America and did socioeconomic development legal work for a year. But it was still risky. And sometimes taking those risks pays off. And so take calculated risks that get you potentially into a new space that you didn't expect to be in, and you'll probably be that much happier than if you take the Foreign Service exam and are now working at the Consul General because that's what you planned to do when you were 18.